issues. And we have Day at the Capitol coming up. So we brought in Johnny. He works with ARRM, which is our local trade association. And he's going to do a little presentation on best tips and practices and everything like that. And then before we get started, if you haven't already, there's some handouts over here. It includes, I put together a couple of handouts on, like this.
I took the whole pack.
Yeah, the whole.
Let's go back and the whole pack.
Take one of each. That's where they went. Okay. So this one and then the green one are like I kind of narrowed it down to what Phoenix residents of Phoenix Service Corporation's top priorities are. So you can read it more in depth later, but I kind of did an overview of both the state level. And then if you go on the back, it's the federal level. And then on the state one, I put down ARRM has, Johnny will talk more about this, but he has several bills that they're bringing to legislators. So I put down the ones that best fit Phoenix residents, and then Phoenix Service Corporation has different ones on the bottom. So grab some of those. And then I also put ARRM put together legislative priorities. So these are the bills that they're like negotiating on, trying to get passed in the House and the Senate. You don't need to know all the details about the bills, but it's nice to reference the bill numbers, and Johnny will go more in depth in that. But and then I also had some handouts. They're kind of more like worksheets. So one is for direct support professional, one is for family members, and then one is for self-advocates. So they're kind of like worksheets to help you share for when you're talking to your legislators. So if you haven't grabbed them already, grab them before you leave. But just kind of want to give an overview of that.
And could I just jump in, just
Yeah.
so you know who your audience is?
Yeah.
We've got a family member, and I don't know if you're gonna want to do introductions, but then I think we have some staff from our service corporation, which does like unit-based services
Yep.
and housing support services. And they're wondering, like, am I a direct support professional? You're an employee who is your job and how the cuts impact you potentially, in your own life. You can talk about it from that perspective. The direct support professional term is for the staff who work in our group rooms, but just so you know who your audience is,
Yeah,
it's not all DSPs in here.
Perfect.
And I was just, could you, because I'm not really familiar with ARRM, could you just briefly describe what that is? And
Yeah, that's my first slide. So
okay.
I'll get right into it.
Any other questions before we get started? And I know we have several people online too, so.
And if you're online and I don't see you and you have a burning question, feel free to speak up and do my best to answer all those questions. But thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here. Like Jackie said, my name is Johnny and I work with ARRM. Got to figure out the best way to navigate the text here. There we go. What is ARRM is a great way to start us off here. So ARRM stands for the Association of Residential Resources in Minnesota. We are a trade association of disability service providers who operate under the DWRS, the Disability Waiver Rate System in Minnesota. And when I'm not here talking to you or I'm not helping set up Day at the Capitol, I'm working with legislators to try to pass some of the bills that are on this handout here, this legislative priorities form. And all that is really a long way of saying that I work for all of you to pass bills that hopefully will make life a little bit easier and fight against ones that might make it a little harder. So a little bit about my background is that before I was doing this with ARRM, I was the aide to the governor of Minnesota, and Tim Walz, and then before that, I was a congressional staffer. So before this, I was really on the other side of things, working with legislators themselves, having a lot of people come meet with us and kind of hear their stories and getting it from the other point of view. And then just some miscellaneous fun facts. I started as a newspaper writer, so there's a lot of ways you can get into this field. There isn't one set way. Anyways, let's see here. Awesome. So before we talk about telling your story, talking to legislators, kind of what to expect at the day at the Capitol and things like that, I want to set a few expectations. The first one is there's no correct and absolutely perfect way to engage your legislator. Legislators are all different people. There's a lot of them. There's 134 members of the Minnesota House, 67 senators in the Minnesota Senate. And they all are different. They all have their own reasons why they ran for office. They all have their own backgrounds, things like that. So there isn't one perfect silver bullet to engage every single one of them. On top of that, so much of what we do when we tell our story or when we advocate to a member of the House or the Senate is that there's so much context around everything. So like Jackie mentioned, this is a really unique legislative session because right now we have a split in the House. So 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. That makes it a little tricky. We had a special election, which wrapped up yesterday. So we didn't even have a full House until today. And it makes it so that every legislative session is a little unique. Budgets change, the people in office change. That means our approach and our strategy is always evolving. So a good starting off point is just knowing who you're dealing with right now in this moment of time. So to do that, we want to know who your legislator is. And I'll walk you through how to find them. So one thing unique about Minnesota is that we do have so many House members and senators. Between the House and the Senate, we have over 200 of them. So it can be a little intimidating as to like, where do we find these people? And we'll start off. So how do you find them? I always just Google who represents me in Minnesota because I never remember that URL. It's super easy. It'll take you to the very first option, which brings you to this page. This is Minnesota State Legislature's website. This is how you find out who your state rep is. So when you get to this webpage here, it'll ask you to put in your address. I just put in ARRM's office address. So if you want to know, we're based out of Eagan. And as soon as you put that address in and hit search, it is going to bring you to a list of names and faces, some of which you might recognize, some of which you may not. So when you look at this list here, a few names might stick out to you. Who really sticks out to you in this list here?
Amy Klobuchar.
Amy Klobuchar-Smith, yeah. So those are your federal representatives. Those are not who we're going to be talking to, even though they're the ones who get the headlines. They're the ones who are the most well-known. You see them on the news. They're not going to be the ones who we advocate to on the state level. So obviously there's the federal government and the state governments. When we're talking about the state government, you're going to want to look for the people with that MN in front of them. So MN House, MN Senate. For this example, I just underlined our MN House, which is Bianca Vernon. Next to their name, you see what party they belong to. These are all DFL. If they're Republican, it'll say GOP next to them. So once you type in your address, this is the page you get. And then if you click on contact right next to their face there, it will bring you to this really handy page. This is their state legislature bio page. And when you see this, there's a lot of information on here. It tells you where their office is, what their phone number is. Sometimes the representatives will have their direct emails on there. I start off every conversation when I'm talking to a state rep with the legislative aide or the legislative assistant. They'll always be listed right under the representative's name. They all have one of them at the state level. And always kick off any kind of introductory message with the legislative aide. And we can talk more about what that looks like. But they'll have their phone number and email there. So it's real easy to get in touch with them right off the bat. Any questions on finding your rep? Pretty straightforward. Minnesota does a good job of making these accessible. So getting comfortable, getting engaged. I think when you haven't talked to your representative before, this is the first time you're having a meeting with them, can be kind of intimidating. Like you don't know what to expect. You don't know if you're going to say the right thing or the wrong thing or what their reaction is going to be. So now that we know who we're talking to, it's kind of like, now what?
Do you want us to save questions for the end or?
After the slide, we can go through a few questions, but then I have some at the end, yeah. So we'll send that first message, and like I said, I always send it to that legislative aid. So when you're advocating for an issue, the best way to connect, I think, is always to start with either an email or a handwritten letter. They do have their phone numbers listed on there. Might not be the most receptive to that all the time. So anytime you're doing an introduction, I think handwritten letter is like king. If you can't do that though, for whatever reason, email also works. And really just introduce yourself and introduce what you enjoy talking about. Say, I'm Johnny Tevets. I work for ARRM. I'm interested in disability services. And just get the conversation started that way. Obviously, with things like Day at the Capitol, we'll have specifics, but if you just want to start that relationship with your representative, send that initial email. Send something friendly, just saying I'm a constituent and I hope that you will support disability services at the legislature. This doesn't mean you have to have a long, detailed message about like policy or what bills they want to sign on to, just something more general. So like I said, support disability services this session is a good general statement to make. For your purposes, you can talk about the work that you do. So say, talk about a day in the life. This is why this work matters. Why the work you do matters, and ask the representative to just support bills that support you. And then, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
When you're talking about speaking to the representatives, do we actually, how hard is it to speak directly to them, or will we be communicating more with the case?
Yeah, so that's a great question. At the state level, you'll often be talking right to them.
Right to them.
If you're talking to your senator or your congressperson, it is almost always going to start off with a meeting with their staff. And maybe then it'll climb the ladder, but with your state reps, they're interesting people because our state representatives are part-time. So a lot of them have jobs outside of this that they do the rest of the year. And then they're in session from like January to June. So even though they seem like, they're elected officials, it can seem intimidating, they're just normal people with other jobs and other interests. And it's kind of easy to connect with them that way. So what to expect? Let's frame this in terms of like Day at the Capitol. So you're going to have a meeting with your legislator in person, talking directly about issues. Like I said, Day at the Capitol on Tuesday is a great opportunity to do this. So when the opportunity arrives, it's helpful to know what to expect so that you're not just blindly going in and just talking at them. So here are a few tips. The first is that great, the more the merrier. So the first tip I have is that you'll start almost all these encounters with the legislative aide. That's just when you like come into their office, you'll check in at their desk. Legislative aide is there for you. I always say be early to the meetings. Oftentimes representatives are running a little late, but it's great when you're already there, ready to go, so that they can hop right into that meeting without losing any time. So you're going to start a lot of these encounters with the legislative aide, even though you'll be meeting with the representatives. And LAs are really great because a little bit of kindness and patience with them goes a very long way. They have to answer all these phone calls from angry constituents all day. They get yelled at a lot. It's a tough job. You all do kindness and patience as like a living, basically. So they're going to really like all of you. So the LA is basically the person who handles all the administrative tasks for the representatives. And this is often their first jobs, so they can be a little shy or not super outgoing. Just go up to their desk, tell them who you are and who you work for, what time your meeting is, and from there, they'll bring you into the legislator's office. So once you get there and the legislator is now in the meeting, greet the legislator, thank them for coming to meet with you all, and then get comfortable. I'm not the best public speaker, like I admit that right away, but when you're in these meetings, my best advice for you is to just like take a deep breath, relax, settle in. The legislator wants to hear from you. It's their job. They don't always know about the issues. So legislators get into these roles for a variety of reasons, but not all of them are going to know a lot about disability services. So you're the experts. Almost all the time, you guys are all the experts. So have that confidence to know that you're the ones in charge driving the meeting. Time with legislators is often very limited. They have a lot of meetings throughout the day. Meetings can be like 10 minutes long, sometimes 20. So even though that time is limited, don't rush. The thing I always say is be quick, but not in a hurry. So even though you need to make the most of that time, don't rush through 1,000 things and then have them leave that meeting saying like, I have no idea what just happened. So your time with the representative is limited. So keep that constraint in the back of your mind, but speak clearly and directly to them. If you need to, take a minute to recalibrate if you get off topic a little bit. So from there, let's dig into what those conversations will look like.
Before you, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Please ask questions.
Maybe you went over this, but how do you go about scheduling that meeting with the representatives?
Yeah, so we can go back a couple slides here.
You covered that already, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I could have said this better, but whoop, there we go, I think. Yes, okay. There it is, okay. So first, of course, we talked about identifying who your legislator is. I'm not sure what's going on with the screen. There we go. When you want to schedule a meeting with your legislator, reach out to that LA, that legislative assistant. Not this one for every single legislator, but the LA for the corresponding legislator. And just have that initial conversation saying, hey, we'd like to meet with Representative Vernig to talk about disability services. What time works for the representative? And then go from there. Usually it's pretty easy with state reps. Your federal representatives, a little bit trickier depending on the time of year.
Jackie, do you want to talk a little bit about the fact that, you know, you're scheduling with ARRM sessions with legislators
Or day at the Capitol?
for Day at the Capitol?
Yes.
If you wanted to go to that, and there may be some, depending on where you live, there may be some legislators who, you know, a legislator who is your legislator, depending on your.
Yeah, let me cover that. So, next week is our day at the Capitol, and it's, for those who haven't been, it's our, annual advocacy day where we join with disability organizations from across the state. And ARRM is the one organizing it. And there's a rally to start off the day, and then, ARRM is scheduling meetings with all the representatives. So I requested meetings for Phoenix residents' homes, and then they're also scheduling for other organizations as well. So there might be a meeting already scheduled for your representative. So if you're interested in going, let me know. I can look at I got the schedule yesterday. And anyone is welcome if you're a constituent, like you live in their district, or if you work in their district, then you're welcome to join that meeting. And I also should add, you can meet with them any time of the year. It doesn't just have to be on this advocacy day. If you want to go, you know, in 2 months from now, or when they're done with the session, which is middle of May, they're much more free in the summer, fall-ish time. So you can meet with them anytime. It doesn't have to just be this day.
So next Tuesday, if we choose to go to the Day at the Capitol, is that a paid event? Will we get paid to go, or do we have to take time off or have to?
No, that's paid.
We typically allow people to go for, you know, a period of time.
Right.
Yep, and I have a slide on Day at the Capitol as well, so we'll talk a little more about that. But for, the slides I have here, like we were saying, if you want to meet with them in the summer,
Sure.
this is a great way to go about it. And to your point,
Yeah.
there's so much more free
Yeah.
come the end of May, start of June.
Yeah.
So that's when the legislative session ends and their time as more so districts liaisons more than anything begins. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I called our representatives on Monday.
Yeah.
And I left a message, and on one of the voicemails, it says, this is Avery, the legislative assistant.
Uh-huh.
I called both of them on Monday. This morning, I got a call back from one of them, which was great. So it took, in my mind, I'm thinking, when I worked full time, it's like, well, 48 hours, because I was thinking, but so I don't know, this other representative that I haven't heard anything from.
Yep.
Should I contact them again tomorrow?
I think 48 hours is a great rule.
Okay, so let's pass that.
Yes,
Okay.
I think I've had to do this plenty of times where, especially setting up all these Day at the Capitol meetings where we're scheduling meetings with just about every legislator. Half of the LAs will respond and get back to you pretty timely, and half of them need a reminder or two.
Okay, but with a phone call versus email, phone call is better. Or no?
I think when you're talking about setting up a meeting, either one is fine. If you've already started that communication via phone, go ahead and continue it that way. If they don't get back to you the next time, I'd say start shooting them an email and attaching the representative's email on it, because those are available as well. And then you'll have both of them looped in the combo.
And I was just thinking about this when Jackie was talking about contacting the representatives where the group homes are. So I'm a parent rep.
Yeah.
So I called people that represent where I live, but I should go to,
And
See the representatives.
I'll talk to you after.
yeah.
But
yeah.
yes, we do
I
have
know.
them for that home.
I hope other guardians will do that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you want a representative to visit a place like a group home, you want that group home to be in their districts. So finding out who represents that home, not necessarily where you live, but where that home is, would be the more direct way to go about it.
Well, I would love it if they would visit the home, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking on Thursday, we should try to set up because it's my husband and our daughter and I,
Mhm.
who's
Yeah.
in the group home. We're meeting with these representatives together. So
Great.
I'm thinking we should make an appointment where whoever represents where Viking House.
Yep, I was gonna talk to you about that. There
Yeah.
is 2 meetings already set up, so I can talk to you after, but yeah. Yep.
So, again, contextualizing this in terms of like Day at the Capitol, we have our rally and then we have meetings with legislators the rest of the day. And I'll talk more about that in a couple slides here. But once you meet that LA, you check in at the desk, you're in that meeting with the representative. It's kind of like, now what? Like who talks first? You always go ahead and you have to have your ask ready. If you're meeting with a legislator, don't just be in that room to chit chat. I always use the phrase bottom line up front. That's what we always said as congressional staffers. What is your bottom line? What is it that you hope to get out of the meeting? And always start with that. So introduce yourself, but then say why you're here and what you want from the meeting. Whether that's a specific bill, and we talked about briefly bill numbers. Hey, we want you to sign on to this bill here. Start with that. If it's about something more broad, we've been talking about budget cuts a lot. Say, we want you to keep disability services safe from budget cuts. That's why we're here. Always start off those meetings with that. If you don't start off with the ask, you can start to get lost in the shuffle a little bit. And by the end, it becomes a little confused why you're having that meeting to begin with. And I know from personal experiences, representatives love to just know why they're in that room. Don't keep them waiting. Know exactly why they're there right away. And then once that ask is stated, you can dig into the details after that. like I said earlier, representatives are not always super knowledgeable about the subject you want to meet with them about. So introduce the thing you want to support, and then let's move on to the next parts. I'll briefly touch on this first, though, which is as soon as I put it on this. So this is the big ask this year. This is like this year's assignment, 2025 specific. We have a legislative agenda right here with all of our bills, and some of these bills have been in session for multiple years. We're trying to get a lot of different things passed. But the primary thing is that there are budget cuts on the horizon that not only threaten these bills, but threaten all the bills we've done past 10 years. So the big ask is keeping disability services safe from budget cuts. That is the overarching plots, if you will. It's great to have a bunch of bills that help the work you do and support what you do, but we can't do that if there's no money to do that. So we have to secure the budget for human services before we get into these asks. And like I said, the governor proposed budget cuts to disability services to the tune of over $1 billion over the next 4 years. So 65% of the total cuts to the states are in human services. I feel ya. That was my reaction too. I hear ya. So 65% of the total cuts to the state are in this one department. So really the message is, beyond just the bills we have here, is that don't gut this budget. And our rallying cry really is cuts have costs. Cuts have costs. So what are the consequences of cutting $1 billion over 4 years? Like, yes, you save money. You save money next year and 4 years from now. But what is the consequence of that? And we hope part of the story, part of the next slide we get into is highlighting why cuts are bad. Because you all would be the direct people to speak to that. What is the consequence of gutting so many services? So moving on to the why. You've made your ask. You said either support this bill or do not cut disability services in the budget. But now you move on to the why. So the why is the detail. The why is, why should they support you? Why should they listen to you? So budget cuts would harm us because, or this bill is important because, and then this is where you tell your story. You all here are the best in this room at explaining this issue. I can go to a representative and talk to them about disability services up in Moorhead, Minnesota, and how they need this specific bill. But I don't work there every day, and I don't live that life every day. Talk about the work you do every single day. Representatives, a lot of them don't know what DSP stands for. So tell them what it means. Describe to them what you do from the time you wake up to the time you check out. Because the work you do is hard. This is a hard job. And it requires funding and it requires support from our legislators to make it all work. So talk about what would happen if budget cuts make it so that you can't hire new folks or that you have to close group homes in a different state. What happens to those people then? And then I think importantly, and what we've touched on very momentarily, is that you don't need to get bogged down in details, right? You don't need to know the numbers or the dates that things go into effect or the direct dollar amounts. Because the representatives, they don't know those details either. That's kind of the hard truth, that they don't know those numbers either. They don't have those memorized. So you can have all these numbers and all these facts, but the real thing that will connect with a legislator is your story, your day in the life, the work that you do day in and day out. They'll remember that. They're not going to remember number X, on the spreadsheet.
So I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
The bills you want us to focus on are listed here. So what's up been on my mind is the proposed, well, it hasn't been officially proposed, but it's unofficially proposed, $880 billion to cuts to Medicaid.
Mhm.
But that's more of like on a federal level, so I
Exactly.
think really, so we can't really talk about that.
So you can talk about Medicaid. These reps won't vote on that because that's
Yeah.
a federal thing. But that can be more evidence in your story. You can say, why are we cutting money at the state when they're already going to cut at the federal level? That's double layers of impacts. So we're already being hurt over here. Don't also hurt us over here. And that can be part of your argument. Even though they don't vote on Medicaid, that's Tina Smith, that's Klobuchar, that's all of our members of Congress. It does help back up your argument.
And can I clarify, if they end up cutting Medicaid or cutting the 800 million from Medicaid, the states are gonna have to cover
The
that
match.
cost,
Yeah.
yeah. So if they're gonna have to cut on both the state and the federal level, we're gonna be in trouble. So I was gonna mention that part. If you guys look on this handout, on the back is the federal level, bullet points. And then for the state level, I put on for Phoenix residents and then Phoenix Service Corporation respectively on the bottom of the state side are the bills that each organization will be affected by. And I just went over, I looked at ARRM's legislative priorities and said this one will affect Phoenix residents, this one will affect Phoenix Service Corporation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just kind of wanted to pull out the highlight, because ARRM is representing like providers all over the board. So I wanted to pull out what would represent our two organizations specifically. Does that make sense?
Yep, and as much as we work to lobby for these bills, a lot of our time too is spent playing defense, making sure that these cuts don't happen, setting up meetings with representatives, governor's office, trying to explain to them why this is a bad budget. So, and you all can kind of do the same thing with Medicaid. So like you were saying, the state would have to pick up the slack somewhere, right? So sticking it in the budget here to cut human services by $1 billion isn't going to help when we also have to pick up Medicaid slack. And again, that can be part of what you talk about. So one thing that I think I get the most nervous about when I talk to representatives is the questions that they have, because you can't predict them. Some representatives are really tuned in and they'll ask really great questions. And some of them don't know a whole lot and they'll ask a question completely out of left field. That is just what happens. The reality is you don't need to have an answer for every question. It's okay to say, I don't know, I can get back to you. Because you can always follow up with them again. But if you make something up or God forbid lie on the spot there, that's the worst thing you can do. They will drive you out of town so quick if you lie to them. So do not do that. I don't suspect anyone in here would, but just tell them what you know. And if you don't know something, you can always find out later. So the last bit of the why I have here is just, if you could tell one connecting story, what would it be? So if you're in the legislator's office talking about budget cuts, talk about a time when staffing has been low. Talk about a time when, maybe hopefully you don't have this experience, when a CRS closed. What had to happen to all the people who live there? What happened when a family couldn't get support for their loved one in a local area and they had to move far away? So if you do have a story that connects to the issue, that is like the perfect pair, the perfect marriage in those conversations. And then if there isn't a connecting story, tell your story. So again, this kind of relates to what I was talking about with representatives won't remember numbers you throw at them, but they will remember when you tell them why you got into this field. the first job I had in this field was with a member of Congress, and the meetings we would attend were all over the board. I couldn't tell you a single number that any of those folks ever threw at us, but I could tell you a lot of stories about what they shared with us, what they shared with the representative I worked for. And you learn so much more that way than you do just giving them a fact sheet. So like I mentioned before, what does your day look like? Talk about why this work is important. What do you do? What would happen if you weren't there? And then relate that to your representative. Kind of throw it back at them. Why should this representative help you? Well, this is going to be what happens when I'm not able to do this work. And they'll get that by telling your story. Any questions on that before I jump into some more general do's and don'ts here? I still have a slide on day at the Capitol, so we will get to that. But no matter what the issue is, or no matter what your meeting with the legislators focused on, I think these are pretty good general do's and don'ts. Do obviously be polite and professional. Like I said, you all kind of do patience and politeness and care for a living. You care for people with high needs. It's probably pretty natural for all of you to be polite and patient. So always just do that. Do be on time. Always be on time. Representatives, like I said, are often very late themselves, but it's helpful when you are there ready to go. They can come right into the meeting, land in their office, and you're running. If you are going with a group, have a speaking plan. So if you're in the office with 4 people, you're all talking to one representative, have a 1, 2, 3, 4. Who's speaking first? Who's going after? Who's closing? So that you're not all talking over each other. Be unified. By that, I mean, don't give contradictory information. If someone says something wrong, you can politely correct them, but don't give conflicting viewpoints on an issue. Otherwise, that representative is going to leave there wondering what they should do. Should I support this? Should I not? I got 2 different voices in the same meeting. Establish a connection. So once you leave that meeting, leave a business card, leave an email, leave a follow-up way to contact them, or that they can contact you, so that conversation can continue. Or if they want to ask a question in the future, they know who to reach out to now. We have a few representatives right now who will be talking about a completely different bill, and they'll reach out to some of the folks at ARRM and be like, hey, do you know about this issue? And that's just because we've established a connection. We've met with them enough times where they know they can trust us to give them some good information. And then, of course, have an ask. That's the first thing you do when you go in. Bottom line up front. Know why you're there. The legislator knows why they're in that room. Have that ask ready to go. A couple do nots. Like I said, do not assume that they know everything about the issue. There's only so many representatives and senators who are in human services as a committee. Some of them work in public safety. That's the committee they're in. They know nothing about direct support professionals. They know nothing about disability services. I'm being a little harsh on them, but if you go in with that assumption and you kind of start from the basics, you ensure that you're all on the same page. Do not use industry jargon. So if you're going to say DSP, let them know what that means. Direct support professional. If you go in, you just start saying DSP, it's going to get a little uncomfortable because they won't know what the heck that is. Do not veer off topic. It's okay to be friendly and chit chat a little bit, but don't take so much of your time just chit chatting that you run out and you never really got to the ask. And then, of course, like I said, don't contradict or talk over each other. That kind of goes into the have a speaking plan, be unified. And the number one do not is lie. You want that representative to trust you, to be able to come back to you if they need to. Having that trust is really important.
Oh, I was just gonna say, when you said about using industry jargon,
Yeah,
that DSP would be so confusing to someone that even heard what that job and those
Yeah.
acronyms stood for.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, like we were just discussing what our role was gonna be here and how we fit into that, so, yeah.
one of the first meetings I had as a congressional staffer was talking about mining in northern Minnesota. I didn't know anything about mining. He didn't know anything about mining. They knew a lot about mining, but they didn't explain any of it to us. I don't know any of the acronyms they used. We left that meeting like, we don't know. So as much as you can, use plain language. Pretend that they've never heard of any of this before. Oops, I think I lost my spot. Oh, here we go. That works. And just kind of a general overview, like we talked about, what the heck is going on. We'll pretend that says heck in the middle. So like I said, knowing about the issues is important. Staying informed is important before you even set up that initial meeting. Budget cuts, of course, we've talked about that. Over 1 billion in cuts over the next 4 years. You compound that with Medicaid cuts and you're in a tough financial situation. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty at the federal level. And a lot of that is just, this is a new White House, this is a new administration, it takes time to get stuff set up, but you also compound that with Medicaid cuts, everything at the states, and it creates a lot of fog of war, if you will. Uncertainty already existed before this year too, with staffing issues. Of course, there's been a staffing crisis in Minnesota for quite a while. And then just what happens if there's closures? What's the plan if places have to shut their doors? It creates this whole atmosphere of uncertainty. And that is something that representatives need to understand.
Isn't the outcome, I mean, because there have been closures, especially in outstate.
Yep.
Isn't the outcome of that these people then go to live in like state hospitals?
So it can create some congestion in the hospitals for sure. And that costs a lot of money.
A lot more money. So
Yeah.
that's a good point to make.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, hospitals have other tasks to do as well. So when they get congested, that affects our healthcare system and other
Right.
ways. So it's a whole domino effect. And it's not good. It's not good for anybody. So with that, I'll shift focus a little bit here to talk about Day at the Capitol. So show of hands, who've been to Day at the Capitol before? Nice. Okay. Well, it should look a lot like last year. We'll have our rally, which starts at 10 a.m. I recommend getting there earlier than that. The yearly bugaboo is always, where do you park? And I wish I had a good answer for you. It is not the greatest area for handicap accessibility, which is a shame. The parking lots are almost all open, which were open last year with one exception, because the state office building is closed. That lot is closed as well, but really my advice would just be plan ahead a little bit, give yourself some time to park. People do find parking. It might just be a little bit of a ways out. There's also the option of using the light rail if that's an option for you and the folks you come with. It might not be, and I totally get that. Otherwise, just plan ahead, give yourself a little bit of breathing room so that you can get into the rally on time, or just a little bit of time to relax.
Can I add on to that? I will be sending details for day of, including the parking map that ARRM shared with us. And And that's updated since last year, since there are a few of the parking lots that are closed. So I'll share that by tomorrow, so everybody has that.
Yeah, the other thing too is we did do a webinar on Day at the Capitol, which is viewable now that it's on our website. And I can show you how to get on that as well. But so the rally, once you get into the rally in the rotunda, we'll have tables set up which have legislative handouts. There are these little booklets that the pages tear out, so you can leave it behind with the legislator when you meet with them. It's got more information on the work that ARRM does and all the legislative priorities we have. We also have some merchandise this year, and of course, every year we have buttons. So grab some buttons, grab some merchandise, and then be loud, because the governor's office is right next door to the rotunda. I've been working in that office before. When there's a rally in there, it's really hard to work when there's 1,000 people screaming like behind the wall. And that's what we want. So definitely be loud. And then once the rally ends at 11 o'clock, that's when meetings occur. So ARRM has scheduled meetings with almost every legislator in the House and Senate, with a few exceptions. And then go over all the things we've talked about here. Start with that ask. Start with that bottom line up front. Parlay that into the work you do and why it's important and why it needs to be funded and why it's so critical, not just to people with disabilities in Minnesota, but the domino effect that happens when you're not there. And then, of course, keep lines of communication open at the end. If you want to continue those conversations, leave a card, leave some contact information, an email address, a phone number, whatever way works for you, so that if that representative needs you again in the future, they know who to go to. And one last slide here, then I promise I'll shut up. So the other 364 days a year, Day at the Capitol is one day. It's March 18th. And then there are a lot of other days of the year where advocacy is still super important. ARRM will continue to work on all these efforts, not just on the 18th, but before and after. We post action alerts to our website. So I don't know if you send those out to the group, but you might be familiar with those. Those are web-based letters that go out to all the representatives. Letter writing, we always encourage you to write to your representatives about the issues that matter to you. We talked about how to find your representative, and on those pages is also their mailing address. District dialogues. These are small groups that we do with specific legislators in their own district. We typically do these around election season so that when a new representative comes in or a recently elected one comes in, we have a dialogue with them right away. And then just keep the invitations going. So many ARRM members are so great at just inviting a representative to come to their office or come to a group home and observe. And we're always happy to come along with you on those. I've been to quite a few as well, just in case you want some extra support talking to the rep as they visit a home. And then finally, just stay informed. It is a weird time we live in where there's so much news flying at you all the time. It can be tough to sift through all of what you hear and see in the news. ARRM does its best to try to narrow that down to just what's going on with your world, disability services. We send out a weekly email, we write a weekly blog, and it's just related to this work. So I think that's a great way to stay informed. And of course, there's many others as well. My last slide just says questions. So does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question, but can you show them those action alerts that you guys send out? How to go, like, do a show on the screen, how to do that? Because I know we have a lot of new staff and they may not know how to do that.
Alan, am I able to just pull up a web browser here?
Yes.
Cool.
But then.
Oh, but they're not seeing it on the screen.
They're not gonna see it on the screen. I can.
And I want to add, the way that Johnny is going to show us on ARRM is the same way that Anchor does it. Anchor's our national trade association. So
Yep.
when I send these action alerts out and it has a link, it's going to go to this website, but Anchor does it the same exact way. They'll have a form to fill out as well. So
Yep, so this is ARRM's website here. You'll see a tab at the top that says Advocacy Center. And anything we do related to yelling at our representatives or getting information out or day at the Capitol type events, we'll put in our Advocacy Center here. So on the right-hand side, you see these kind of like gray bars. This is always where our action alerts are going to be. And if you scroll down, you can see active action alerts. So we have one right now about rejecting the governor's proposed cuts to waiver services. You just click take action. And then you just have to fill out a few bits of detail. Alan's logged in, so it's got his address up there. It's just going to ask you to fill out your own address. And then it's going to have you fill out a few bits of information. So for this one in particular, it's saying describe who you are and why disability services are important to you. You would type your little message in there, as Alan is so kindly doing. And then once you have that message all typed up, it's going to show you which of your representatives that's going out to. So once you type in your address, it'll automatically populate the representatives. And then this is the message that it's going to send. It's going to fill in the representative's name. It's going to fill in your name once you fill out that information. And then the only thing you have to do is fill in that little form that Alan was typing in a minute ago. And then at the very bottom, you just hit send. And then it just sent that message to Senator Sandy, was that Papas, and whoever the representative was. It's super easy. You just fill in little boxes of info and it'll automatically populate a letter that sends to their email address. So anytime we have an action alert, it's going to be on that little sidebar. Anyone can do it. You don't have to be signed into an ARRM account. You can just go ahead and send it. The other thing I'll point out is that resources page over there. So we have a few things that kind of rotate on this resources page. The one that I will point out right now is that advocacy action letter to legislators. If you want to click on that, you don't have to, if you click download there, it'll bring you to a different tab. For this, we just have a little brief instruction page on what we'd like you to send to your legislator. And then at the very bottom, the last page is, keep scrolling. There we go. So this is the page we'd want you to handwrite a letter on. Just because it's this big, bold, do not cut or cost disability services. This is what we'd want you to write on, send a letter out to your representative. Anytime we do things like this, it'll be on that advocacy page. And we'll also make note of it in all of ARRM's emails so that you don't have to check this every day. We'll let you know when new stuff is on here. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have a perspective to share as a parent guardian. Our daughter has been at Viking House, I think we're going at 10 or 11 years. I'm never really good at dates, when she started. But especially with this election.
Mhm.
And we talked a lot with our friends and relatives about what it means for Olivia and what it's like for her and her group home. And a lot of our friends and relatives really didn't know. I mean, they didn't know how responsible. I never used the direct, whatever it is, the DSP. But yeah, I never used that terminology to say the people that take care of her every day, especially the medical issues.
Yeah.
is really, they need to know that, and that she is in a house with 5 other people who have medical needs, and they have to have that all straight. They're kind of like, wow, I had, it's not just giving her a shower and, putting her to bed and get her on the bus to go to her day center. It's those kind of things that when they think about it, that's a lot of responsibility. And then also, I think one of the important things is to emphasize that this is their home. And that and I tell people that one of the reasons that I wasn't so impressed with PRI when I was looking at group homes 11, 12 years ago was because I was told that this is their home. If this person gets sick and is on hospice, this is where this person can die. And that really hits people, that it's a lifelong thing. And I mean, that's a huge issue, that these direct people are responsible for till the end. In many situations. And a lot of people don't know that. And the other thing that is very different, that has changed in the recent years, is the number of adults with neurodivergent, autistic diagnosis that are in a group home. PRI one has 1 or 2 of them, I believe, and that there is this whole large group that are maturing, that their parents are not going to be able to take care of them. And I wouldn't bring that up to scare these people, but I don't think people think about this. They think a lot of times when they think about people in a group home, if they, don't know them, they think about people in wheelchairs. They think that they do have some way of communicating. I mean, I don't think they really understand how diverse this population is.
That's a great perspective. And that's so true. I mean, and legislators need to hear that, because they have their perspective and they have the issues that they believe in, that they grew up understanding. And they don't always get those other ideas. We had a legislator who said, when I was growing up in school, there was no one with disabilities. Why are there so many now? Like, that can't be. And we're like, yeah, because when you were growing up in the 80s, the 70s, they were all in institutions. They were there. You just didn't see them. So some of these legislators grew up in a different time, in a different world, and you can't fault them for that, but you have to educate them on what to do now. And perspectives like that, they need to hear time and time.
I mean, people in general need to hear it. I mean, we would go out to dinner with friends, and I mean, we just casually kind of bring some of this up, and they had no idea, because in their mind, they had this certain picture.
For $18 an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Which used to be way less. I mean, we still got a lot of growth and things that need to change, but boy, when people are barely hanging in there and there's somebody's everything.
And there's somebody's everything. For some of these people, they don't have any guardians. Or, I don't know, maybe they have a state appointed one, but.
Or families or friends.
And I think what makes this area and state government so unique and important is that when you're talking about the budgets, it's on a sheet, there's numbers on there. All of the numbers correspond to actual lives, people who have to go every day living their life in a group home, or it's a DSP, or it's an organization. It's not just a line on a spreadsheet. It's not the same as the judiciary, where we're talking about how much money are we going to put into, Department X. It's actual people. So when you start removing those line items, you start directly impacting people's lives. So that's why we say cuts have costs. What happens when you actually remove those items in the spreadsheet? Because then they impact people in the real world. And I hope you all are excited to talk about that, or fired up to talk about it, because there's so many legislators who need to hear that.
Any other questions? I did see a hand up online. I think it went down.
Jackie will send out an update with all the handouts and stuff here tomorrow.
Yes, I'll send the handout out, and we are recording this, so I will send that out as well if you want to review it again and to catch anybody that wasn't here, so.
Sorry to my friends on Zoom land or Teams land.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
If we're not able to make it a day of the Capitol,
Mhm.
are you guys having any time where we can meet and do something again?
So Day at the Capitol is just our big
I know, yeah,
one rally. We're always wanting to do stuff with legislators.
okay,
Oftentimes, organizations will lead the way in inviting them to sites like where you care for people, whether it's a group home or
Okay.
otherwise. But if you wanted to meet with a certain legislator, I am so happy to help you set that up.
okay.
And I can leave my email here as well because we do that as much as we can with folks.
I think you missed that part. You can set up meetings throughout the year. It doesn't have to be this one time.
What about the representatives where they're outstate, you know, Babbitt, Minnesota, way up north, whatever? I mean, do they, pretty rare for them to have their constituents come in and talk to them, correct?
It's harder for sure during the legislative session.
Yeah.
One session is over, so June until January, they're in districts. And, I've attended meetings with out of greater Minnesota representatives, so they are out there. During the session, of course, it's harder for their constituents.
So should we be reaching out to those representatives?
Yeah, so representatives will always prioritize constituents.
Yeah.
So living in that district. So if you live in one of those greater Minnesota areas, it's especially important to connect with them on this issue. Because in the Twin Cities Metro, it's a lot easier to access those folks during the session, but they all need to hear it. So if you live in those districts, by all means, connect with them.
Yeah, we don't.
You're thinking just, it's a good idea to keep everybody informed.
Well, I'm thinking, just to send off a card or an email to somebody in some very remote area in Minnesota, just because this is a concern of mine and they're gonna vote too.
Yeah, so you don't have to be a constituent to request those meetings or to send those emails. They might just prioritize those communications. You can send an email to everyone in the House and Senate if you feel so inclined, and we do that pretty often. And that's why we do things like action alerts where we can connect with our members who work out of Ely and Moorhead and all of those to make sure that they're also communicating with their reps. One of the interesting things about human services right now is that the lead in the Republican Party is from Fergus Falls. So he's in greater Minnesota, he's out there. So it impacts everyone. And I would say that in greater Minnesota, disproportionately impacts them. Because where do they go when the one home in their town of 5,000 people closes?
Right.
Creates a much bigger issue.
That's a good point though, Cheryl, because even if your representative's not on the Human Services Committee, they're all eventually gonna vote
Right.
Yep.
on these bills. So we need everybody to be informed of this.
Exactly.
Other questions or comments? Anyone online?
Go once. Twice.
No.
If you do have a question later or just a perspective you want to share later, reach out to me. Is there a good way to get my email?
I'll share your email.
Perfect.
I'm gonna send the recording and I'll send the handouts out
Yeah.
too, so.
I want to make myself accessible to everybody, so don't hesitate if you have a question or a comment. Do my best to get back to everyone. So, yeah, thank you.